We're going to call this meeting to order, and we'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. And this is our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And then we will have some introductions. We'll start at that end.
Can you hear me? My name is Wendy Larson. I live in Homer Township.
Phil Schwantz, Mount Vernon Township.
Oh. Sheree Hales, I live here in Winona, recently moved from our farm in Wiscoy Township.
Hi, I'm Larry Graydon, farm with my family in Mount Vernon Township. Wanted to mention that I have served on the Winona County Soil and Water Board. And another tidbit, Nance and I were invited to sit on a panel for Governor Dayton for the Water Summit 2 years ago, last month, in Morris, Minnesota. And we've received numerous soil and water and tree farm awards and Atlanta Lake Sustain Award. Thank you.
My name is Rachel Stahl. I live in Wiscoy Township.
So we need to approve the agenda. Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Okay, motion by Phil, second by Larry to approve the agenda. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Then we need to approve the minutes from last month. Are there any questions or corrections?
Motion to approve.
Okay. Second. Okay, motion by Phil, second by Rachel. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? With the minutes from last month are approved. And next on the agenda, we have Attorney Nuttall will address us.
Good afternoon. Just given the nature of what we're dealing with today, we wanted to make sure everyone was clear on what the roles and procedures are going to be for today's event. I know this is larger than the petitions we're generally hearing. Just a reminder, wow, I used to have eardrums. Just a reminder that the roles involved in all of this are something you should be aware of and keep in mind when you're making your decisions. Planning staff's role is to provide you with the report addressing the petitioner's request, the ordinance requirements, information regarding the property, analysis of criteria based on the information that was available at the time that the report was prepared. Today you'll also get a presentation that covers relevant information as well as any new information that they've obtained since the date of that report. The county attorney's office role is to provide you with legal advice as needed. In this particular situation, we were asked to provide an analysis of the applicable law. We were not asked to provide a legal opinion as to whether factors were met. So the legal memorandum from us is just to provide you with the information on which to base your decision. The petitioner, who will be presenting after the staff report, their role in all of this is to persuade you that what they are asking for does in fact meet the criteria. That burden, according to case law, does rest with them. Not with staff, not with the public, but with them. The speakers at a public hearing, their role is to provide information and persuade you whether or not they believe criteria have or have not been met. Their testimony should be related to the criteria themselves, not personal opinions regarding the petitioner or the request. The Board of Adjustment, and this is where we want to make sure roles are clear here. Your role is to make a decision whether or not the record before you has or has not met each of the criteria required for a variance. We know that each and every one of you are here because you have an interest in or are passionate about land use issues, but your job in all of this is to set aside any personal opinions and make your decision based upon the record. That record includes the applicant's materials, the staff materials, comments, testimony, and discussion. So at this point, you have received some of those items, but not all of them. As most of us are aware, information was received by the county attorney's office that each of you may have some concerning areas regarding potential conflicts or bias, and we want to make sure that we are addressing those for the record here. Our office did provide a written memorandum on conflict of interest as well as quasi-judicial decision-making responsibilities. That was released earlier today. Each of you have now received a copy as well. When it comes to conflict of interest, the law says that a public official should be disqualified when they have a direct financial interest in the outcome. So I have some questions for our Board of Adjustment members here today. Do any of you have any current financial dealings with Daily Farms?
No.
No.
If Daily Farms were to be granted a variance, would any of you expect to have any financial dealings with them at that time?
No.
No.
If Daily Farms were to have their variance denied, would any of you experience a financial impact as a result?
No.
No.
The other issue that was raised as it related to the quasi-judicial decision-making is whether or not a decision is arbitrary and capricious. An arbitrary and capricious is present if the decision-maker relied on factors not permitted or intended to consider, or if it reflects the decision-maker's will rather than their judgment. I know we covered this at our training last week as well. But we want to make sure that each of you are relying on the same information before you, that you're not relying on factors outside of the proceedings. So with that, have any of you had or heard conversations with anyone else about this particular variance request prior to this meeting?
No.
No? No?
I've heard people talk about it. I did in my Tai Chi class the other day.
Did anything about those conversations provide you with information that is not already provided to you?
No,
Did it impact your decision-making in any way?
no.
Okay. Mr. Graydon? Did you say no?
No, I did. I will try and project
Okay.
a little more.
Yep. Mr. Graydon, did you say no to the question about conversations?
Right, no. Try and keep my mouth shut for quite a while here.
Ms. Stoll?
I've been present for conversations, but I have, same as Cherie, been sort of, seems like all everybody's talking about, but been trying to keep my mouth shut.
And did you receive any information as part of those that's other than what you have before you already?
Nothing pertinent, just opinions mostly.
Did it change your opinion or cause you to have an opinion already today and make a decision?
No.
Have any of you received any information regarding the Daily Farms request other than what was provided by staff as part of your agenda packet materials prior to today?
No.
Okay. Have any of you conducted any independent review or investigation regarding the Daily Farms variance request prior to this meeting?
No.
No.
Before I became on the Board of Adjustment, I did do some research and I requested some documents regarding the Daily Farms. And it was before I was submitting my comments about their EAW. But viewing those documents does not have an effect on me viewing these documents before me today.
Does any of the information relate to the variance request before you?
I don't believe so. It was documentation about farming practices, and I don't think that this body is here to decide anything about farming practices. It was related to the MPCA, not to the variance request.
Did any of the information that you saw cause you to form an opinion as to whether or not a variance should be granted or denied?
No.
So now to the essentially elephant in the room here. As I said, there's been concerns raised about each one of you, so I'm going to ask you some questions about your individualized interests and whether or not you can set aside any opinions you may have previously formed and base your decision solely on the record before you. If you cannot do that, if you feel like your personal opinions will take precedence, then we would ask at this point that you recuse yourself, but I will ask you our questions and we'll go from there. So let's start the left with Ms. Larson. It's my understanding that you sent a comment to the MPCA regarding the decision as to whether an environmental impact statement for Daily Farms should be issued on October 31st of 2018. Is that correct?
Yes.
In that letter, you expressed concerns regarding potential environmental impacts and whether an operation of the size proposed was really needed. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you also asked them to require an environmental impact statement for Daily Farms?
Yes.
Did you, in any of that, indicate whether or not you were in favor of or opposed to the Daily Farms request?
No.
Did you indicate whether you would vote one way or another in your comment to the MPCA?
No.
Did anything about providing that cause you to form an opinion or make a decision prior to what you're hearing today?
I wrote that based on the information I had at the time, which was well before I even considered applying for the Board of Adjustment. But we certainly have received more complete information since then.
You are also a member of the Land Stewardship Project, which is an organization that's indicated opposition to Daily Farms' request. Is that correct?
Yes.
Does anything about your involvement with Land Stewardship Project make it so that you would be uncomfortable in making the decision before you today?
No.
If the variance were to be granted, would you feel as though you had to justify the decision of this board to Land Stewardship Project?
No.
Have you already made a decision as to whether or not, or as to whether you will vote to approve or deny the requested variance?
No.
And are you able to set aside your involvement with Land Stewardship Project as well as any personal opinions that you may have and base your decision in this matter solely on the record before you?
Yes.
Is there anything else that you think might cause you to have any bias towards one decision or another in this particular case?
I don't think so. I mean, there's so much information here that is strong on both sides.
Thank you. Mr. Schwantz. It is my understanding that you are a township officer, member of the Township Officers Association, and a member of its board of directors. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And did you attend the Township Officers Association meeting on February 13th of 2019?
That is correct.
At that meeting, there was discussion and a vote regarding a submission from the Township Officers Association to the Winona County Board of Adjustment that supported the approval of the Daily Farms variance. Is that correct?
They did take a vote, correct.
Did you participate in that discussion?
No, I abstained.
Did you vote on it?
Did I vote on it? No.
And you said that you abstained. How did you abstain from that vote?
When Mr. Daly got up to present the information to the group, that's when I took my township officer's hat off and basically just became a member in the crowd as far as just an observer.
So you remained silent during the vote?
Correct.
You didn't vote for it or against it?
Correct.
Does anything about your position as a township officer or board member of the Township Officers Association make it so that you would be uncomfortable making this decision as a Board of Adjustment member?
No.
If the variance were to be denied, would you feel as though you had to justify that to the Township Officers Association?
No.
Have you already made a decision as to whether you will vote to approve or deny the requested variance?
Not at this time.
And are you able to set aside your involvement in the Township Officers Association and any personal opinions and base your decision in this matter solely on the record before you?
I believe I will, yes.
Thank you. Ms. Hales. It is my understanding that you also sent a comment to the MPCA regarding the decision as to whether to require an environmental impact statement for Daily Farms on November 14th of 2018. Is that correct?
Yes.
In that letter, you expressed concerns regarding groundwater contamination, in particular as a result of expanding feedlots. Is that correct?
Correct.
And you asked the MPCA to require an environmental impact statement for Daily Farms?
Yes.
Did you indicate in any of that whether you were in favor of or opposed to Daily Farms?
No, I did not.
Did you indicate that you would vote one way or another in your MPCA comment?
No.
You are also a member of Land Stewardship Project. Is that correct?
Yes.
Does anything about your involvement with Land Stewardship Project make it so that you would be uncomfortable making the decision before you today?
No.
If the variance were to be granted, would you feel as though you had to justify your decision to Land Stewardship Project?
No.
Have you already made a decision as to whether you will vote to approve or deny the requested variance?
I have not. We have discussions yet to have and information to hear.
Are you able to set aside your involvement in land stewardship project as well as any personal opinions you may have and base your decision in this matter solely on the record before you?
Yes, I can.
Thank you. Mr. Graydon.
Graydon.
Graydon. It is my understanding that your grandson's married to a member of the Daly family. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Would you describe your relationship with your grandson as close?
Cordial.
And does your relationship with your grandson make it so that you would be uncomfortable in making the decision before you today?
No.
If the variance were to be denied, would you feel as though you had to justify that decision to your grandson?
No.
Have you already made a decision as to whether you will vote to approve or deny the requested variance?
Not yet.
And are you able to set aside your personal relationships and any personal opinions you may have and base your decision in this matter solely on the record before you?
Absolutely.
And finally, Ms. Stoll. My understanding that you also sent a comment to the MPCA regarding the environmental impact statement for Daly Farms. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And in that letter, you expressed concerns regarding groundwater contamination, air quality, economics, and information that you felt had not been provided. Is that correct?
Correct.
You also asked for that an environmental impact statement be required for Daly Farms.
Correct.
Did you indicate whether you were in favor of or opposed to Daly Farms?
No, I was hoping that the MPCA would provide us with as much information as possible, and that's why I was requesting the EIS, but since the MPCA made a decision that we did not need that, I feel like I can trust that agency.
Did you indicate that you would vote one way or another in your MPCA comment?
No.
You are also a land stewardship project member, is that correct?
Correct.
Does anything about your involvement with land stewardship project make it so that you would be uncomfortable in making the decision before you today?
No.
If the variance were to be granted, would you feel as though you had to justify your decision to land stewardship project?
No.
Have you already made a decision as to whether you will vote to approve or deny the requested variance?
No.
And are you able to set aside your involvement in land stewardship project and any personal opinions you may have and base your decision in this matter solely on the record before you?
Yes.
Is there, I know I asked this of Ms. Larson, is there anything from anyone else that they think might cause any concerns regarding any interest or prior decision making in this matter? Then we also advised the attorney for Daly Farms if he had anything he wanted to follow up on or ask, he was welcome to do so, so I'll give him that opportunity at this time.
Thank you. My name's Matt Berger. I represent Daly Farms. I have a few questions that I'd like to go through with respect to this. Appreciate the county taking the time to go through this. I believe that this is a serious issue as to the fundamental fairness of the proceeding and making sure that the decision is made by a group of folks who are not biased, not partial, and have not made decisions ahead of time on factual or legal issues that would impact these proceedings. I'm going to get right to the three that are members of Land Stewardship Project because I believe that's a critical issue given Land Stewardship Project's role in these proceedings. Would each of you agree that in joining Land Stewardship Project, you were required to pay a membership fee to that organization?
Yes.
Do you want us to speak individually? How would you like us to do this?
Yeah, you can go. Each of you can go one at a time on the questions, and if I'm addressing a question to anyone in particular, I will do so.
Yes, I'm a member of Land Stewardship, and I have been for some years. As a member, I get a newsletter and sometimes mailings. But not to be flippant, I am a member of the Marine Art Museum, the Food Co-op, the Winona History Center, the library, and the local Audubon Club. And I get mailings from them and newsletters. And would have to say I'm not actually in charge of the activities of any of these organizations.
Have any of those other organizations taken a public position on Daily Farms' proposed variance request?
No,
Have any of those other organizations sued Daily Farms or the MPCA in connection with this project?
not that I know of.
You're aware that Land Stewardship Project has done both of those things?
LSP has not sued Daily Farms, that's incorrect.
That is absolutely correct. An appeal was filed. Daily Farms is a respondent in that appeal related to the EAW.
He has the floor. If it gets, they shouldn't be speaking in like that.
I'm sorry, you have to,
Remind him regarding the ground.
okay. You have been reminded.
Are you referring to me or the person in the crowd who chimed in without the microphone?
So,
So, Ms. Hales, would you agree that to join Land Stewardship Project, you were required to pay a membership fee?
yes,
Okay. And Ms. Larson, you as well? Yes. As a member of LSP, Ms. Stoll, do you participate in advocacy efforts on positions that LSP takes?
In general, my involvement with LSP has been with the Farm Beginnings program and with the Soil Health program, which is separate from the advocacy and organizing wing or branch or whatever they call it of LSP, but I have peripherally participated in advocacy activities as well.
Okay, and Ms. Hales, have you participated in advocacy matters on behalf of Land Stewardship Project?
no. I did a mailing for them for their anniversary picnic some summers ago, or helped with the mailing.
No other activities for them?
No.
And Ms. Larson? Ms. Stoll, were you aware about the lawsuit that Land Stewardship Project started related to this project?
I think I read about it in the paper. Yeah, I don't know deeply about it.
Okay. And Ms. Larson, were you aware of that? As a member of Land Stewardship Project, do each of you generally agree with the viewpoints expressed by Land Stewardship Project? Ms. Stoll?
I would say in general, a lot of them. Like I said, I really appreciate their Farm Beginnings program that helps teach new farmers how to stay on the land and be on the land, and I really appreciate their soil health work.
Ms. Hales?
I would agree with that. I think those are terrific programs they're working on.
Okay. Do you agree with other views that Land Stewardship Project has put forth?
Yes, I think that they work with farm communities. When I get their newsletter, I'm always struck by how many people they're working with around the state. So,
Are you familiar with Land Stewardship Project's efforts to promote townships adopting zoning ordinances to stop animal feedlots?
no, I'm not.
Ms. Larson, are you familiar with those efforts on behalf of Land Stewardship Project?
No.
You've never heard that discussed in any meetings or seen it in newsletters?
I really don't go to the meetings. I just get the newsletter, and it seems like they're doing good work with trying to improve health coverage and health programs for rural citizens. That's pretty interesting.
Do you follow them on any social media?
No.
Ms. Hales?
I'm sorry, what?
Do you follow Land Stewardship Project on any social media?
No, I don't.
Not on Facebook or Twitter or anything like that?
I don't really do social media.
Okay.
I'm past that generation, I'm afraid.
Ms. Stoll, do you follow Land Stewardship Project on any social media?
I can't remember if I follow them on Facebook or not. If I do, I don't have I have a flip phone, so I don't check that stuff very much, so I have no idea if I follow them or not. I'm sure that you could find out.
Okay, thank you. I want to touch on the comments that were submitted to the MPCA as part of the environmental review process there. And Ms. Larson, in your written comments to the MPCA, You stated that I think it is clear that the expansion very likely has the potential for significant environmental impacts and that therefore an EIS is indeed justified. Do you remember writing that?
Yes,
Did you agree with that statement at the time you wrote it?
yes.
Do you still agree with that statement?
Not necessarily.
What changed?
All the information we've received for the variance request.
And what information changed your mind?
Well, I don't know if I've changed my mind, it's just I haven't changed it one way or the other. I mean, I haven't come down on it one way or the other. That'll come out in the discussion, I think, of the evidence in the record.
But you had made a decision before, and now you're saying you haven't. Am I understanding that correct?
I wrote that at the time, that was the information I had at the time. We've received we've received much more complete information since then. My background is as a copy editor and as an evaluator of proposals for academic program changes. So I'm primarily concerned with the text and what's in the text as far as the consistency and the evidence that's presented.
You also stated that, quote, "It is my belief that such a large factory farm-style operation would be very detrimental to our environment and to the interactions within our rural communities." Did you believe that at the time you wrote that statement?
At the time, yes.
Do you still believe that?
Not necessarily.
How do you define a factory farm?
Well, a CAFO, large, a concentrated animal feeding operation.
So in your mind, any operation that constitutes a CAFO would be a factory farm?
At the time, I'm not a farmer, and I've not lived on a farm, and I did not have at the time a definite idea of how many cows, and I think it would depend, again, on how the operation was, how it was run, how it was managed, and what kind of facilities it had. So no, I no longer really think that that's necessarily a problem.
Have you done any other research to change your mind about factory farms?
No, there's a lot of information in this variance.
Ms. Hales, I want to touch on your comment as well, because you would also express some opinions in your letter to the MPCA. You stated, "I think there is a real risk of irreparable contamination of groundwater by the cumulative effect of all these livestock operations, Daly's expansion and number of animals being far and away the largest, well beyond the current county animal unit cap." Did you believe those statements at the time they were made?
Yes.
Do you still believe that there is a real risk of irreparable contamination of groundwater from the livestock operations?
I was addressing the risk of cumulative effect of the increased operations that have happened in that region, in that part of our county. There have been 2 other large animal operations that have increased somewhat recently. There's other feedlots in the area, and this would be an additional increase of animals and waste. So my concern was the cumulative effect of what that would have in a fragile geological region that already has compromised water.
And do you still have that concern?
Oh, I think that, yes, I do. I think that that would be appropriate.
Okay. So you still have a concern that the cumulative effect of Daly Farms' proposed expansion would pose a risk of irreparable contamination of groundwater?
I think worrying about the quality of groundwater is something that is necessary.
Right.
I recognize that the Dalys have worked hard with their engineers and the MPCA to put all the applicable best practices into play. I think those practices were put into effect because there was reason to worry. So,
Ms. Larson, Ms. Hales, and Ms. Stoll, you guys each requested that the MPCA issue or require an environmental impact statement for Daily Farms' project, correct?
Yes.
yes, I did.
Larson, you requested that as well? Yes. And each of you is aware that no EIS was required or has been completed?
Correct.
Correct.
Does the fact that no EIS was completed impact your analysis of the variance?
No.
No,
So if it was, you thought it was required before and you don't have the information you thought you needed, you still believe that you can be fair on this?
It's the role of the MPCA to determine if there is a risk or a need for those things. It's a role of our citizens to state our opinions, and it's the role of this board to decide if this variance meets the criteria laid out in the law. And so I don't think it's this board's job to decide whether or not there is a groundwater contamination issue or if farming best practices are being followed. I believe that my role here has nothing to do with the environmental concerns. It has to do with whether or not we can approve it based on the findings of fact and the information here. So if the MPCA says that there is no need for an EIS, then that has no bearing on the decision of this board. We're not in charge of groundwater.
Ms. Hales,
Concerns.
do you still believe an EIS should have been required?
it hasn't been, and so we're working with what we have here now.
And I'm asking about your opinions and belief.
No,
You don't believe one should have been required?
I had hoped it would be because it was the most rigorous study and it would protect the groundwater that everyone uses. But it hasn't been, and so that's where we're at.
Ms. Larson, do you believe a EIS should have been required?
I think the fact that we were asking for an EIS does not mean we were against the Daily Farm. It's just that the information we had was not as complete as we would have liked. But we certainly, with the variance and the EAW information that we have, we certainly have plenty of information.
I'm going to wrap up here. I appreciate all of you answering the questions. I know this is a difficult process, but it's also a fundamentally important issue about the fairness and the constitutional rights of Daily Farms to have impartial decision makers, and as courts recognize, just as importantly, the appearance of fairness, that everyone who comes before a quasi-judicial decision maker comes without any appearance that the factual matters, which include, in connection with the purpose of the ordinance, supporting agriculture, but also ensuring that there will be no environmental effect, ensuring that decisions on that haven't been made ahead of time and that those decisions aren't biased. I am still deeply concerned with the public comments and the inferences that were made, and would still ask that each of you think about that issue, think about the appearance and fundamental fairness. And again, Ms. Hales and Ms. Larson, I submitted a letter to the county, which I assume will be part of the record. I would reiterate my request that each of you recuse yourself from these proceedings based on concerns about partiality and the appearance of partiality.
Thank you, Mr. Berger. Thank you, Eric.
So at this point, I'll give anyone an opportunity. If you don't believe that you can be fair and impartial in these proceedings, let us know at this point. Ms. Larson? Schwantz? Hales? With that, we will move forward. Talk briefly about the process we'll be following today. Please let me know if you have any questions as I go through this. One of the key pieces that I know everybody wants to know is that we will be taking a break approximately every 90 minutes as needed, just because I know it's a lot of information you're going to be receiving today. We want to make sure you have that moment to stretch your legs, use the facilities, and come back and be able to listen to everyone that wishes to speak to you today. The first thing that you'll have before you is going to be the staff report and their presentation. During that, you are welcome to ask staff any questions that you might have relating to the petition before you. After that, the petitioner will be given an opportunity to present to you. You are welcome at that point to ask the petitioner any questions that you might have. Word of caution on both the petitioner as well as every aspect of this. Whenever someone's here at the podium presenting for you, we ask that you not engage in debate with them. You are welcome to ask questions to clarify their information. This is not a time for you to enter into discussion or debate with the speaker. Those things should be saved for amongst yourselves. During discussion, you'll have ample time. After the petitioner's presentation will be the public hearing, at which point anyone who has signed in as a speaker will be allowed their time. I'm going to go over the Board of Adjustment ground rules for today's meeting that I want to make sure everyone is clear on. No placards, flyers, signs, or posters are allowed in the meeting room, and that includes distribution of such materials. Any additional materials that anyone wishes to submit during their speaking time may be accepted only at the discretion of the chair. They are to be placed in the boxes that we have provided for you. You're not to approach the members of the Board of Adjustment. All attendees are required to conduct themselves in a courteous and respectful manner. They shall not yell, scream, or use foul language. The public's to refrain from private conversations, comments, applause, audible responses, or other demonstrations which disrupt, disturb, or otherwise impede the proceedings of the Board of Adjustment. We also ask that the person at the podium not engage with the audience members. You're here to provide your information to the Board of Adjustment members. The applicant shall speak after the staff report, have the opportunity for rebuttal following the public hearing. They are not subject to the time limitations, but we ask that they not be repetitious nor digress from the variance criteria. Any person that's wishing to provide oral comment must sign in before testifying. If you still need to do so and wish to speak, please go out and sign in on the appropriate sign-in sheet. Oral comment will be heard in the order of the speakers registered. Each speaker must be recognized by the chair before speaking and then state their name and address for the record. Each speaker is only allowed to speak once during the public hearing session, and they will be given 2 minutes to speak, which cannot be shared with any other speaker. Comments should be limited to providing information to the Board of Adjustment regarding the criteria at issue before the board. And again, the speaker and Board of Adjustment members shall not engage in debate. All public comments should be directed to the Board of Adjustment as a body and not to individual members, staff, or any other attendees. Speakers may respond to questions from the members of the Board of Adjustment, which should be limited to points of clarification regarding the speaker's testimony. If clarification is requested, the speaker may only address the point for which clarification is sought and not additional points. The chair does reserve the right to limit an individual's presentation if it's redundant, repetitive, overly argumentative, and not relevant to the issue under consideration, or in order to maintain order and adherence to the rules. Sufficient warnings may be given by the chair at any time during the remarks, and in the event that any individual shall violate the rules of decorum that are set forth, their comments may be ended. Any person who violates the rules of decorum may be removed from the meeting at the discretion of the chair. And as a reminder to everyone, please silence your cell phones. If you can take them out and check them to make sure we don't have ringing phones, those are very distracting. So please make sure that those are taken care of. After the public hearing has been closed, the petitioner will be given the opportunity to provide any additional rebuttal points. We ask that they, again, not be repetitive, but stick to points that are relevant to rebutting the items during the public hearing. And then it will be time for your discussion. During the speaker's testimony, you are welcome to clarify points with them at that time. We ask that you do that during that time. It will not count against their 2 minutes when they do that. But we would like during your discussion to avoid calling individuals to the podium. If something does need to be clarified during that time, it should be done formally by asking the chair to invite the person to the podium to speak, waiting for that person to get there, and then asking the question. Findings and decision should be made. Again, as we've trained, I don't remember how many years in a row now, you should be applying the information in the record, which includes the written materials in your packets, the presentations and testimony that you're going to hear today, and any discussion points that are raised amongst yourselves during your discussion, to the criteria, the 8 criteria that you've been advised are required in order to grant a variance. And the question you should be asking is, does what is before you indicate that a criteria is or is not met? If there are facts on both sides, you can consider those, and we ask that you address those as part of the record to make sure that the record is clear as to how you are basing your decision. It's your role to give weight to what you have before you. You decide how much weight each person that testifies or each piece of information has for you in making your decision. If you're weighing things one way or another, make sure you're discussing that. We want to be open and transparent about how this decision is being made today. As with every other variance petition, we have provided a draft of findings of fact for you. Again, it's a draft. We've modified these in the past for you as well. It's a starting point, and it is based on the staff report and the information that was available at the time, not based on the complete record. As with every other time we've done this, any finding can be revised to indicate that it meets or does not meet the criteria required by the ordinance. But also, like all those other times that we've revised them, you must then provide the factual analysis that supports whatever your decision is. I will have those findings available. I'll be revising them as you direct me to do. If all criteria have been met, then the variance should be granted. If one or more criteria are not met, the variance should be denied. If the variance is granted, you may attach conditions to that variance, but any conditions must relate to the criteria that are required for the variance. With that, any questions from the Board of Adjustment at this point? All right. You know where to find me if you do. With that, I'll turn it over for the staff report.
Thank you.
Hope everybody can see all right at the angle you have over there. My name is Lou Overhaug. I'm a planner with Winona County. I'll be running through some slides here, just giving an overview of the proposal and some of the bigger topics related to the petition. The variance is to allow a feedlot to expand from 1,996.4 animal units to 5,967 animal units. There are 3 sections of the ordinance that are cited, which we'll get into a little bit later. But essentially there are the non-conforming uses section 3.2.3, feedlot section, which is the animal unit cap, which at 8.4.2, and the agricultural district allows conditional use permits for feedlots between 300 and 1,500 animal units. So if the variance was approved tonight, the next step would be a conditional use permit. And in order to allow that conditional use permit, there would be the variance from 10.4.6 to allow a CUP to be granted above 1,500 animal units. So that's the citations. There's only one set of criteria, so if you approve the variance, we'd be approving all 3 sections. Oops, wrong way. The request. Existing animal units are at 2,275 AUs. That's spread out over 3 feedlot sites. They're all within a certain distance of each other, so they're looked at together as one on the MPCA's NPDES permit. The main feedlot site is at 1,996, And that's the one that will be getting expanded with this proposal. And again, the total animal units that they're proposing is at 5,967. Location is in section 16 of Utica Township. You have Lewiston here, Utica here. Daly Farms is pretty much in the middle, a little closer to Lewiston on the north side of Highway 14. This is the little bit closer detail of the site. So the LLP is the 1,996 animal units, the existing feedlot site. LLP 8 is the proposed feedlot site. The reason that they're proposed as separate is because there is a parcel line here. It's a technicality, really. It's an expansion of this site out into this direction. Here's the site plan. You can see existing feed pad and the stormwater basin is in this area here. This is Highway 14, just for reference. This is the farm site, so farmhouse here. There's existing manure basins to the north of the existing barns and parlor. The proposed parlor and barn is in this area. Stormwater basin to the west over here, and a manure basin here in close proximity to the existing basins. We have a few videos, 4 or 5. They're short. Each one's 1 to 2 minutes. So we'll go through those. And then I have a couple more slides talking about the ordinance requirements and PCA requirements and our criteria. So with that, if you want to hit
We are currently in Utica Township, and this video footage is in regards to the daily petition, agenda item 22119, number 1. And we're currently on the property, and the intent of this series of clips is just to give an orientation and kind of a layout of the existing operation in regards to what the proposed expansion would be. With me is the feedlot officer Carly McGinty and also petitioner Ben Daly. So with that, I guess I'll just let Ben maybe narrate. It's clear enough, so hopefully we can get a good audio here on this. So we're currently essentially almost centrally located on the buildings here. This is looking to the south at Highway 14, several residential structures and some of the commodity bins and some of the other service shop buildings that are on the property. And I guess with this, we'll maybe just touch on this existing open lot area or feeder area.
So this lot here is LLP 7, and this is where we house our dry cows. To the right of that is a old commodity shed that we have equipment parked in.
Okay.
And then if we spin around towards the east here, this is our new commodity shed structure. And then further to the south, you have the bins, grain bins there. And then looking back towards the north, we have 3 bunker silos where we store feed. And then to the east of that is our flat storage area for feed as well.
Go.
So we are now looking at barn number 4, and that houses the milk cows. All 4 barns are the same size.
This is the view looking back to the west. And these barns are roughly what size?
300 feet long by 110 feet wide.
And I got a very captive audience while it's silage time. Okay, the next part, we'll just walk more towards the west. Okay, we're on the most western part of the existing buildings, kind of looking back to the east and now back to the south. And this is the existing sand building. And I'll let maybe Ben explain what's on the horizon here as we kind of view to essentially the northwest.
So looking towards the northwest there, that's where the new proposed freestyle building would be, 100 to 200 feet to the northwest in that field.
Yeah, the perspective of the nearest residential agricultural properties located to the west, to the south. See Highway 14 again in the distance. To the southeast, and Lewiston in the vicinity in that direction. And this is a freestall building here?
It's a freestall building there. Yep.
Okay.
It currently houses milk cows.
Okay, we're currently on the north side of the existing buildings, and we're just kind of showing the area where the actual storage is currently, and then with the proposed project. So let Ben explain where that would be located.
So when we're looking over towards the west again, the proposed freestall building would be constructed, and then as we move to the north, on the other side of this Manure Lagoon structure here, to the north of that would be where the proposed Manure Lagoon structure would be constructed. And then as we move to the east, there are the other 3 Manure Lagoon structures.
The snow before the snow comes.
Okay, we're currently on the northeast portion of the existing farmstead, and you can see this is where the feed pad location is, and there would be one additional feed pad structure built to accommodate this, and essentially off to the right or off to more to the northeast of that would be a containment structure for stormwater runoff. That would be just to protect the leachette from running off and getting into water areas too. This would be looking back to the east, Lewiston, in the distance here to the southeast, and the existing stockpiles and bunker containments. That should conclude the video footage for this petition.
Okay, just want to touch on the manure management plan. It's been determined that 4,083 acres are needed to meet manure land application spreadable acre requirements. The petitioners have submitted information that they have access to 4,179 acres. This came through the EAW information that was part of the MPCA process earlier this fall. The petitioner owns a portion of the acres. The other portions would be made up of agreements and leases with neighboring property owners. The manure is spread by commercial animal waste technicians who are certified. It's injected and required to meet setbacks from streams, water sources, sinkholes, etc. I guess the reason that that's important is that there are people who are trained and have certifications on the line in order to and have to do their jobs properly. It also, the injection does reduce the amount of runoff from the surface. So, hit on a couple of facts about the crop systems that the proposal will facilitate. I think Daily Farms' presentation, they'll get into this a little bit more. So, but there are 800 acres approximately that will be converted to from row crops to perennial cover. Alfalfa and grasses. Alfalfa in particular is good at fixing nitrogen. And essentially a green manure and reduces the potential for runoff and nitrogen leaching. That's not all. That's just a couple that we picked out of the proposal. And like I said, Daily Farms will touch on some more of the benefits, like the cropping systems that they propose. The Winona County zoning ordinance, like I stated before, non-conforming uses, section 3.2.3, talks about the expansion and enlargement of nonconformities. This comes from state statute. Our ordinance in this regard is word for word for statute and what that enables us to do. And it's very clear that nonconformities shall not be expanded or enlarged. A variance can be applied for to allow that, but it's in direct conflict with the intent of the ordinance. Section 8.4.2 states that a feedlot permit may not be issued for a feedlot in excess of 1,500 animal units. That's been a long-standing policy with Winona County. And it is where it is. The Chapter 10.4.6 requires a CUP for feedlots between 300 and 1,500 animal units. Does not provide a provision for over 1,500 animal units, mainly just to keep it in line with Chapter 8. State of Minnesota, as everybody's aware, has is the permitting authority for the feedlot through their NPDES permit. That was issued on February 19th, just earlier this week, by the PCA. The mandatory EAW was part of the PCA's process as well. That was completed on January 4th. With a negative declaration for environmental impact, stating no potentially significant environmental effects reasonably expected to occur. Negative declaration is under appellate review. It should be noted. The state also has a water appropriations permit. That's for any water appropriation that's going to be pulling more than 1 million gallons of water per year, or 10,000 gallons per day. The current operation is on Daily Farms, includes 2 wells using up to 32 million gallons per year. The project seeks An additional 2 wells would be added as part of the proposal for a total capacity of up to 92 million gallons, although they are proposing only to use 75 million gallons of that. The extra is, my understanding is for redundancy in case there's an issue with one well in order to be, in times of emergency, to be able to pull more. The 2 new wells have been permitted, but not used at this point. The wells would still need to be tested to estimate the potential impacts on surrounding wells and registered with Minnesota Department of Health. Warren County staff draft findings of fact. I just have one. I'm just going to touch on this. I think you've all had the staff report, had a chance to look at that. At the time of the staff report, which was the 13th, staff found that criteria number 1, 3, 4, 6, and 7 were not being met. And that's what our draft findings indicate. And we would draw your attention to those specifically when you're going through your analysis and discussion. It's important to note that there has been a lot of information submitted since then. The petitioners have submitted a more detailed analysis of the criteria. There's been a lot of public comments. And there will also be more public comments here tonight. So keep that in mind. Your job, as Stephanie indicated earlier, was to look at all the information and come to a decision, giving the rationale for what the decision was made, how the decision was made. With that, that's the end of my presentation. And if you have any questions for me now, that's fine. Otherwise, we can wait, and we're always here for questions later as well.
I'm a little confused as to what parcel of land the variance is actually for, because the application just has that one parcel where they currently have facilities. That's that 1321, the last 4 numbers. That's around in yellow there.
Yep.
And that's the only parcel number that I see on the application. So is the variance?
That's the existing site.
So
it would also be for parcel 1320 because that's where the proposed expansion is going to be located.
Well, yeah, that's clear from the maps, but I don't see that anywhere in the application. And I was just asking for clarification.
Yep, both parcels.
Okay. In the numbers of animal units, the total includes in that table that we have, includes the cows that are in LLP 7, which is a separate feedlot. So, and that's to remain separate, is my understanding.
LLP 7 is closing, I believe.
LLP 1 is closing.
LLP 1 is closing. LLP 7 is on a different site.
Right, but that number is included in the variance.
It is included in the variance because it's covered under the same NPDS permit.
Okay.
So the variance only applies, can we have that picture again? Thank you. So there's LLP, and then the proposed site is LLP 8.
Correct.
And is it 35.6 acres or?
It's approximately 37 acres is the LLP site. The other one is about approximately 200 acres.
Where the new buildings would be?
Yeah, that parcel is approximately 200 acres.
Yeah, the buildings are only going to encompass a small portion,
Right.
a portion like in this area.
And the other side.
and a little bit over here.
And so the variance applies to the existing and the 200 acres?
Correct.
Yes.
Oh, I thought I saw in the application just the referral to the 36 or 7 acres. So I just,
No, it has to, it wouldn't fit on the 37 acres. Oops.
I see.
It has to encompass this parcel. This is
Okay.
where almost all the additional space will be, but they're essentially, one feedlot for the purpose of the NPDES permit. This will be a new site directly next to an existing site.
Right.
But the hard part is that you have multiple feedlots that are looked at as
Right.
one because of the area that they're within. So there's multiple parcels involved. This proposal is only going to be really on 1320, but it's connected to LLP 1321. The road access
Right.
comes through there. They're owned by the same entities.
And then LLP1 would be closed.
But for the
Correct.
right.
Okay.
But the aggregate, when we look at the aggregate numbers of animal units, going to the 5967 from the 2275, that includes
LLP 7.
LLP 7 being removed
LLP 1's removed.
and LLP 1 being removed. It includes LLP 7 and then all the addition on LLP 8 to get to this
Right.
number.
Okay.
So there's some math that goes
Right.
on there, but I mean, really, this is, the reason why we showed this is to show the aggregate as far as the animal units is concerned.
Thank you.
The reason I asked about LP7 cattle that are staying, the animal units that are staying there, is that if anybody has a problem with the larger number, that wouldn't be as large, because that animal unit is not considered part of the variance, of the expansion, because they're staying where they are, right?
Correct. It's only 138.8 animal units difference, though.
Yeah, but I also have a question about, does it matter that the two parcels, the current parcel and the parcel that's being expanded onto, are owned by different people?
They're owned by the same people.
Well,
It's Daly Farms of Lewiston, and then Michael Daly and Stephen Daly are co-owners of Daly Farms of Lewiston.
okay, so anybody who's a co-owner, or anybody who's a co-owner of Daly Farms of Lewiston is part of this? Their property is part of this?
Yes, a lot of their spreadable acres are owned by Michael and Stephen. That's what they use.
And just a really minor point, what is the official name of is it Daly Farm or Daly Farms? Because I see both
I
plural
see
and
both
sing-
sides too, so you'll have to ask them.
Okay.
Farm?
So are there any other questions?
If not, we can,
Okay.
yeah, we'll be available as
Thank you.
the afternoon goes on.
Mr. Daly?
Thank you again for this opportunity that we have here before us.
State his name and where he's from, just for the record.
Oh, yes.
Sorry.
Name and address for
Yes,
the record.
my name is Ben Daly.
Thank you.
17755 County Road 18, Utica, Minnesota, 55979.
Thank you.
Thank you again for this opportunity. I am a co-owner with brothers and sisters and some incoming people that would also like to farm. So just a preview here, I'm going to be talking a little bit more about the farm itself, and then my attorney will be going over the criteria.
Okay.
So, 150-year-old farm, many, many years ago. The reason we kind of picked the site, and this is just a picture that we grabbed off of Facebook here, but this particular site that we sited on was in the middle of our acreage, and it was easier to bring feed in and disperse manure out. Just kind of the general picture there of everything that you saw in those videos that Mr. Johnson took that we saw earlier. A lot has been made up until this point about our water use, and I wish you guys could see that a little bit better. But in any case, 92 million gallons is the capacity of all 4 wells, the 2 that we currently have and the 2 proposed. 75 million is what we are projecting to be used. The reason the difference is in that is because the old barns that we're going to be using are going to be filled with dry cows and heifers, and the parlor is not going to be running. The parlor actually uses quite a bit of water per day, and so that's why that number drops. And also, dry cows and heifers' needs for water also decline. A couple of cases in point here that I'd like to point out with the water usage as well. It's not unprecedented to have that much water used at one site. North Star Foods in St. Charles, we were told we're using 60 million gallons a year, and the turkey plant in Altura was using 130 million gallons a year. And the reason that is important is because a lot has been made a point of that it could be affecting streams and springs. And to my knowledge, with those ones being run the way they were, I'm not aware of any problems with that. Also, not a problem with other wells being dried up as well. So we're within that range, and actually both of those 2 are not being used. Something's going on at the turkey plant I'm not quite aware of, but they're not even close to the 130 million that they were using. And then just to try to build off of that and what we actually do with our water and what the kind of the process is, because our water does get used quite a few times. After it gets pumped out of a well, it goes through a plate cooler, which is very common on a dairy farm. And half of that plate cooler, the milk is flowing through and being chilled by well water, which is at 54, 53 degrees, and cools the milk to that point, and then gets cooled the rest of the way down into the 39 degree range with a glycol mixture with chillers and stuff. But having a plate cooler like that, using well water to take that initial degree or those degrees off of milk saves a lot on electricity. Otherwise you would be using, like I said, the compressors and chillers quite a bit more. After it leaves this plate cooler, it goes into a storage tank. This is a 6,000 gallon tank that we have. We have another one on hand too. We got about 12,000 gallons worth of storage. And that after it goes through the plate cooler, goes into these storage tanks. After it goes through these storage tanks here, it can go to one of a couple places. It can go to our parlor for washing and keeping this clean. It's very important when you're milking cows to keep everything clean. Or it can go to the cows. There's a picture of a cow drinking water, but we also have sprinklers in our barns to keep the cows cool. And that's what the water is being used for after it leaves those storage tanks. From the parlor, after the water gets used out of the parlor, we still feel it's still a fairly clean source of water. I mean, you're not going to drink it, but it can still be used for quite a few things. This is an above. This is not a great picture, but this picture here, that storage tank is 15 feet up in the air, so it's got a little bit of head pressure. So this gray water is then used to flush the holding area where the cows stand before they get milked. The slope of the holding area makes it so that when the water flushes down, it takes the manure with it. And from there, that manure still has sand in it as well, and that gets pumped over into our sand shed, which I'll be talking about later. Also, if I go back, this gray water tank, as soon as that gets filled to a certain height, the overflow of that will actually go to our sand shed as well, so we can capture that gray water again and it won't be wasted just on this part alone, but it'll also go to the sand shed to help clean sand. Those are the storage tanks that I was referring to that it goes to. That is 2 storage tanks, 3,000 gallons apiece, and those, like I said, hold gray water from our parlor after it's already been through a plate cooler and after it's already been used in the parlor for cleaning. It can be used to flush, or it could be used here in our sand facility for cleaning sand. This is another picture of our sand reclamation building. There's some equipment there. You can see the storage tanks that I was describing earlier, kind of straight ahead. Over to the left of those are some screeners. We call them DTs, and those actually screen solids out of water so that you can reuse it again and again and again. This is a picture of the inside of one of those screens. It's flighted on the inside. The water drops through those screens, and either fecal material feed goes out the end and gets discharged to the manure lagoon. From our sand shed here, can't quite see it here, but from inside the sand shed here, we can pump manure to 2 out of the 4 lagoons that we have, and for the other 2 lagoons, to use those, we actually put in a pit pump with a tractor and transfer it over. This is just another picture of the equipment that I was speaking before of. To the left there, that green machine, that's the actual sand washer. That's where all of the washing takes place of the sand. You can see the blue pipe to the upper left. That's the water that's coming out of the storage tanks, the gray water. And the longer blue pipe that you see going horizontally there, that's the water that's coming off of the sand washer, and that has a lot of that fecal material in it. And that you can see that pipe going into one of those DT screeners. After it leaves that DT screener, it goes back into those poly tanks where it started from. So it's a closed loop system, and you keep using that water again and again and again. This is not my number. This the number that I was told from the people that put this in, that water gets used at least 20 times in this system alone before it gets discharged out to the manure lagoon. And it's also being used 3 or 4 times before it actually gets to, or 3 times before it gets to the sand shed as well. So the cows are going to poop and they're going to pee. So this is a vacuum tank. This is what we use in the barns, in the freestall barns where we house the cows. And that actually vacuums up the sand, the manure, and the urine, and all the water that they've drank or being sprinkled on. And we bring that into the sand shed, and that gets dumped in there, and that's where the process really begins. Within, I don't know, a few hours, that handful of sand that I have in my hand right there, a couple hours before that, it was laden with manure. It had just got brought in. So it really doesn't take very long for that process to take place. And that's how clean a sand you can get, even with reusing water again and again. So another point that I'd like to bring up with our farm, Daly Farm of Lewiston, is we have a ton of things in common with the Land Stewardship Project that many of you probably do not know. One of them is, or you can see the list of them here, one of them is alfalfa. It was said earlier that we're going to need 800 more acres of alfalfa. We currently have about 800 acres right now. We've gone as high as 1,000 acres of alfalfa. It is a very big nitrogen scavenger. It goes down 12 feet into the ground to capture nitrogen. The more alfalfa you have on the landscape, the cleaner water you're going to get. Another case in point, the people that I have talked to for receiving manure are also interested in having alfalfa acres. Now these are acres that, for all general purposes, haven't seen alfalfa in over a generation, because they've gone out of the dairy business long, long ago, and they're crop farmers, and they're very interested in having alfalfa on their landscape and in the rotation of what they're doing right now with corn and soybeans. So a big boost to water quality in Winona County. Another thing that land stewardship really likes to talk about is pasture. We believe wholeheartedly in pasture as well. A lot of the pasture that we have is what we used to use with our cows. 3 different sites. We used to milk at 3 different sites before we brought it into one. That was in '98. A lot of these pastures we have our heifers on. And that 700 acres, that's ours and some rented acres of pasture. We actually seek out farms that have pasture because we believe in pasture so much with our animals. Another thing that you'll find readily on Land Stewardship's website is cover crop. We have been doing cover crop longer than Land Stewardship has been around. I've personally, I don't know what that's about. I've personally planted cover crops for over 20 years. I remember doing it as a little kid. My dad and my Uncle Steve did it extensively before. They did it primarily to keep the ground, to hold the ground so that there wasn't any runoff and you didn't have any loss of soil. Obviously, there's been a lot more word about the other benefits of cover cropping, but that was the whole reason that they got started with it in the 70s. And you can see currently right now we're 300 to 400 acres in a rotation of cover crop. We don't graze our cover crop. We put the cover crop on either just before or right after we apply our manure. The 300 to 400 acres that we're doing right now, we've gone as high as 900 acres of cover crop. And you'll also see in our permit, part of our permit, we have 8 different stipulations for our land, and cover crop is one of them. We're already doing it right now. That's what made it really easy to agree with the MPCA's findings on doing some extra work with our farm as far as making sure that we have clean water. Another thing you'll see in handouts and with land stewardship is beginning farmers. Well, we have them too. They don't necessarily want to farm the same way that land stewardship would like you to, but they do want to farm. And these kids here, college-educated kids, coming back to an area that generally doesn't get a whole lot of college kids coming back. So I think that's very healthy, not only for a farming operation, but it's very healthy for a community. So why do we feel that this is the best spot? Much has been said about, splitting up the operation into separate sites. Well, we have an existing infrastructure. The Sand Reclamation Building, all we have to do inside that building is add a little bit more equipment, and we can make that go with the amount of cows that we're proposing. Centralized feed, it makes it easier and less trucking going up and down the roads if you have that centralized feeding. And it's in the middle of our land base, like I spoke before, bringing the feed in and dispersing of the manure out, and that's also including the people that we have asked to, if they want our manure and if they want to do alfalfa acres as well. And also, the reason that we feel this is a good spot is because neighbors are used to what we do and what we're about. We're very congenial with our neighbors. If they ask us of something, on many occasions, we'll do that. Another reason that we picked this site as well is there's been an ERI scan of the proposed manure storage structure, soil borings, and air modeling confirm that this is a good location for a manure structure. So if we were to build it somewhere else, we'd have to do this whole thing over again, which in and of itself might not be a big deal, but this is already a permitted site. It's already got a lot of things going for it as far as the location and the distance to bedrock that you need for a manure storage structure. And the rural community supports this operation in this location. As you've seen in your packets, there is a pretty extensive support from Lewiston and Utica communities that we're real close to. And that's my daughter. We go trout fishing all the time too. So this is my piece out. So at this point here, Mr. Berger.
Thank you, Mr. Daly.
Thank you. Again, my name is Matt Berger. I'm attorney representing Daly Farm. I'm going to go through the legal analysis. We provided a memorandum that has been distributed and I believe was posted with the website. But I want to highlight some of the key points of what we're asking for here today from you. I want to start, though, by taking a step back and providing some context of what this variance is, why we need it, what are we doing here. So Winona County, like many counties, many municipalities, does zoning that comprises a few different components that we're going to hear about in the criteria later. The first is a comprehensive plan. And that's kind of a big picture document where the community members who are appointed and the government come together and look at things and set forth the values and the goals and policies to further those values that the county residents want to see for their land use in the county. How are we going to further these different interests, different values in different areas of the county and make sure that those property uses mesh well together? It doesn't make sense to have a large power plant or a large factory in a residential district. You need both of those potentially to provide jobs or different services in an area. But how do you locate things in a way that makes sense to provide everything that the community needs as far as jobs, services, housing, all of those things? The comprehensive plan identifies those goals and different areas of the county. The ordinance then is intended to implement those goals from the comprehensive plan. So it's supposed to take those broad, big picture items and put them into place as far as a policy that can be implemented. But the zoning ordinance, again, itself is very broad. It applies to vast areas and not just to individual pieces of property. Now, we all know that there are unique circumstances that may exist with particular uses with respect to particular properties that all of that variation can't necessarily be accounted for in a one-size-fits-all type of zoning ordinance. Zoning ordinances account for those differences, for those unique circumstances, by specifically allowing variances. And those variances are intended to, big picture, take a look and say, we have broad goals for our zoning ordinance set forth in the ordinance itself and in the comprehensive plan. A particular use may be prohibited because in general it may not work on many sites, but in this particular case, for this particular property and this particular use, it makes sense. It's consistent with the goals of the ordinance, the goals that we're all trying to further, and with the surrounding uses, it's reasonable. So the variance is specifically intended to almost as a safety valve for those unique circumstances where the broad ordinance, it doesn't make sense to apply it. And that's what we're asking for today, is a variance. We're not here talking about whether the 1,500 animal unit cap is a good idea or a bad idea. That's a legislative decision, a policy decision that can be debated. What we're here today about is saying, regardless of the merits of that cap in general, does that cap make sense for Daly Farms property and for this proposed project? And so that's what we're asking for you. That's the big picture. I'll go through each of the criteria in the ordinance, and there'll be a lot of legalese that I'll try to distill down and make sense, but there's a lot of words that don't make a lot of sense in common usage. But that's the big picture thing we're talking about. Does this proposed modernization and expansion project that Daly Farm wants to do make sense and further the aims of the ordinance and the comprehensive plan in this case. In going through these factors, again, I want to encourage you, don't lose the forest for the trees. The big picture question, does this make sense here? This project on this property with this family? That's what we're asking for. So the first factor in the zoning ordinance is a big one. The first two factors are big ones. In this case, the analysis is basically the same. I'm going to lump them together in my discussion. And that's, does the variance that Daly Farm has requested, is that in harmony with the intent and purpose of the ordinance, and is it consistent with the comprehensive plan? We're in luck in this case in that the comprehensive plan, the values and the goals that are identified there, are very similar, if not identical, to the stated purposes and intent of the zoning ordinance. And those purposes are stated generally early in the ordinance, but with respect to animal feedlots, there's a particular section. Chapter 8 deals with livestock feedlots, and there's a particular section where the ordinance itself tells us what the intent and purpose is. And that's important because the animal unit cap that we're talking about here is in Chapter 8. So what is the intent of that part of the ordinance? Well, the intent is to balance two goals that in some cases may be in conflict. Goal number one is to promote agricultural production and ensure the health of a healthy agricultural community in rural Winona County. Winona County has a long history of agricultural production and strong agricultural communities, and the comprehensive plan and the zoning ordinance make it a specific goal to maintain that production and that history. On the other hand, the ordinance and the comprehensive plan also recognize that Winona County has valuable natural resources to protect. And so the Chapter 8 of the zoning ordinance looks and says we're going to balance those, and we're going to do that by adopting zoning ordinances that has the purposes to ensure that farmers properly manage animal feedlots and animal wastes to protect the health of the public and the natural resources of Winona County. That's the fundamental purpose here. Promote agriculture, promote healthy agricultural communities, while at the same time making sure that we protect our environment. Now, this 1,500 animal unit cap, again, the decision was made at one point that that was an appropriate cap to put in place in order to recognize a balance in most cases. But that cap isn't by itself a goal. It's not by itself a purpose or an intent. The ordinance doesn't say we are specifically intended that we are never going to have an animal feedlot over 1,500 animal units. That's not the goal that people were trying to further. The goal was, as I said, to balance agricultural production and the environment. So the cap is an ends to a means. It's not an end in itself, or means to an end, excuse me. It's not an end in itself. That's important to keep in mind because a lot of the public comments that have been submitted and a lot of the discussion in the newspapers have focused on the fact we have a cap and that should not be exceeded ever. Well, the cap itself isn't the goal and the ordinance doesn't say that should never be exceeded ever. In fact, the ordinance has the variance to allow that to happen where it's appropriate. Now, in this case, looking at the first side of the scale here that we need to balance, promoting agricultural production and healthy agricultural communities, I don't think that anybody can seriously argue that Daly Farms' proposed variance doesn't further that goal. Dairy is a hard business. There are stories all over the press of dairy farms who are struggling and having to close. We provided in our memorandum some economic analysis from the University of Minnesota Extension Service that looks at the realities of dairy farms over a lengthy span of time. And what that analysis shows is that the cost of production for milk has been increasing more rapidly than the price of milk has been increasing. Now, dairying is a hard business. You got to work every day. You're out there taking care of animals. People aren't going to generally do that if they can't make a fair living doing it. And as that margin compresses, dairies need to adapt. They need to change the way they operate if they're going to survive economically. And the University of Minnesota Extension Service article identifies specific things that dairies should be looking at to doing that. It includes expanding the number of animals, gaining greater efficiencies through adopting new technologies, diversifying an operation through different crops and different things. And if we look at Daily Farm here, they're doing every one of those with this project. They are attempting to adopt a project to meet the economic realities of the time and preserve their operation. They're also looking at bringing family members. We saw the picture of the next generation who wants to come back. That's wonderful. And that impact goes far beyond Daily Farm and the Daily family. That impact is felt in the rural communities, in the other businesses there. It's felt in the schools, who will have more children coming up as young families come back, put down roots, and have children of their own to raise. Rural communities are struggling across Minnesota with an exodus of people leaving. We should be embracing people who want to come back and make a living farming and doing other things, and recognize the benefits that come from people doing that. So we're clear on, in my mind, there's no doubt about the fact that this variance meets the first factor that we're looking at here. It furthers that purpose clearly. But what about the environment? We don't want to ignore that. The MPCA did an extensive analysis. There's a 235-page environmental assessment worksheet that's in your materials that was put together by professional consultants who have all kinds of letters after their name, all kinds of education, and know what they're doing. The MPCA also looked at 615 public comments. And the MPCA has professional staff. They have engineers. They have people with crop consulting backgrounds on their staff. And they went through this process. They reviewed all of the information that was available and applied science to the facts and found that the proposed project does not have any significant environmental impact. In fact, the MPCA made a finding on at least part of this, that the project is going to have an environmental benefit. Not only is it not going to cause harm to the environment, not only is it going to ensure that the environment's protected, it's going to help the environment. And why is that? It's what Ben Daly talked about with the alfalfa and the pasture area. This project is going to dramatically increase the amount of alfalfa and convert traditional row crops from those to alfalfa. And the Land Stewardship Project and the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy themselves talk about the environmental benefits that come from alfalfa instead of traditional crops. We hear a lot in the comments about the karst region, about the threats to nitrates in the groundwater, and we're not minimizing those in the least. They're serious issues that deserve serious consideration. This project is going to help that by putting more alfalfa out there to promote those use. Now, the other thing the MPCA looked at and says, look, the reality is we have this agricultural land out there. These fields are going to be farmed. They're being farmed with row crops right now. They're going to be farmed, and either manure or chemical fertilizers are going to be placed on those fields to grow those crops. In this project, if it goes forward, those fields are going to be subject to a manure management plan that is part of the permit. In other words, if Daily Farm is applying manure and does something improperly, applies too much, applies in the wrong place, they will be in violation of their permit, and the MPCA will come in and say you're in violation and hold them accountable. So this land is going to be subject to greater regulation than it would be if this expansion didn't go forward. In which case, whoever's farming it could apply whatever manure they liked from other non-CAFO facilities. They could apply nitrogen from chemical fertilizers onto that land. The Minnesota Department of Agriculture has proposed some rules. They're not in place now. We don't know if they're going to be. That's not regulated right now. In this case, not only is it going to be regulated by existing regulations, but in their permit, Daly Farm went farther and said, we're going to agree voluntarily to go above and beyond what the state regulations require. We're going to agree to do things like inject into the ground, to use cover crops, to do other practices to protect the environment. So this project is going to affirmatively benefit the environment. So we have a situation here where we have a variance for a project that what in many cases may be competing interests are aligned. This project is going to further both purposes. And that's exactly the type of project that a variance is intended for. On this, I want to touch on just a couple of other points. Number one, we hear a lot about the size. A lot of comments throw around the factory farm label for large facilities. And when you look at it, this project will house a lot of cows. There's no doubt about that. But there will be 13 members of the Daly family participating in the farming operation. So if you break down that number based on the number of family members who are going to be involved, what we're talking about here is approximately 306 cows, 40 heifers, and 9 calves per family member. Now, that's not a large farm. Why should we punish Daly Farm for saying, as a family, we want to do this together. We want to pool our resources and subject ourselves to greater government regulation, but also gain the benefits of efficiencies and gain the benefits of being able to invest in things like the sand reclamation equipment that we saw by pooling our resources, having these animals together in one site, and working together in a project that benefits everybody. That's really what we're talking about here. We can have a lot of small farms by the same people that are separate, or we can have an operation that does better for everybody, better for the environment at one site and is more efficient. Finally, the staff report and the presentation today touched on the non-conforming use, and I want to address that head on here. The current facility is a non-conforming use because it's grandfathered in. If this variance is granted, it will no longer be a non-conforming use. It will be a permitted use because the variance will permit it. So when we look at the purpose of the non-conforming use, that purpose will be furthered because a non-conforming use that exists now will no longer exist. It will then be a permitted use. But stepping back and exercising some common sense for a second, which I know lawyers aren't normally known for, but stepping back, how does it make sense to say that if Daly Farm was below the 1,500 animal unit threshold now and was coming in here asking for a variance for the exact same expansion, how does it make sense to say that that would be consistent with the purposes of the ordinance, but because they're above that now, because they were grandfathered in, they're somehow not consistent with the purpose of the ordinance? That doesn't make any sense. What we're talking about here is a project to go above the existing animal units, and that is consistent with the purpose set forth in the ordinance. Now, moving forward into the ordinance criteria, we have what I call the practical difficulties cluster of criteria. The ordinance breaks these down into 4 separate criteria. The state statute says practical difficulties has 3 factors, but those 3 factors are basically the same as the 4 criteria we have here. I'll break those down, address them separately, but they're kind of all under an umbrella of practical difficulties. The first factor in that is the proposed use reasonable? Now, when we're looking at that, we have the same, what's being proposed in the variance is the exact same type of use that's going on the exact same property now. It's going to be a different size. There's going to be some different specifics, but Daly Farms is operating a dairy on that property now. They will be operating a dairy on that property afterward. It's the same type of use. As I talked before, it's also consistent with the ordinance and the plan. It's not going to interfere. There's no evidence in the record that any surrounding landowners are going to be interfered with. In fact, I believe the Daly family owns much of the surrounding land. It's going to further their use by allowing them to apply more manure there as fertilizer. And I think most importantly, and what I find most unusual, this proposed variance has broad support of the townships and the rural municipalities in the county. I do a lot of work on agricultural zoning issues. I have never seen the type of broad support among the townships and the municipalities that we have here. And that itself is a testament to the reasonableness of how Daly Farm is using their property and how they propose to use it under this ordinance. The second factor of that is the unique circumstances. There's a bunch of legal analysis in the cases. The long and the short of it is there is cases that recognize that existing facilities can constitute a unique circumstance for a property. I cite those in my legal brief, but that just makes sense. The facilities are located and affixed to that property. They are part of the property, and they are a unique circumstance. There's not other properties in the area that have the existing facilities where this is going to be a widespread variance that would be appropriate for every other parcel in the agricultural area. This property is unique because of the investments that have been made to build existing facilities, and because those existing facilities promote so many of the purposes of the zoning ordinance. The sand reclamation equipment that reduces the amount of water that would otherwise be used by reusing it 20 times or more. Having this facility in this location reduces transportation, which both reduces wear and tear.
Mr. Berger, Mr. Daly did touch on that, and we had at one time talked about this being, you know, a sort of short presentation, and I don't want to cut you off, but...
I'll move it along. The first part was the longest part of what I was going to say.
Okay, because...
I appreciate that.
Thank you.
But the unique circumstances here with the reduced transportation, reduced fossil fuel use, well-being of animals, all of that is unique to this property. In addition, we touched on in the presentation, and it's covered in the EAW, the physical characteristics of the property as far as the lack of karst features on this particular property, the distance to bedrock. All of those things make this a particularly suitable site in the area for this type of use. So the unique circumstances element is met here. Essential character of the locality. Again, I feel that this is covered by what I talked about before. It's in a farming area and it's already a farming use. Economic considerations I want to touch on briefly. The staff report and some of the comments suggest that because Daly Farm has some economic motivation for proposing this project, that somehow that means that they don't meet this criteria. The criteria actually says that economic considerations alone don't satisfy practical difficulties. I suspect that you would be hard-pressed of anybody coming in here requesting a variance who doesn't have some economic motivation or some consideration for the economics of what they're proposing. That's the reality of proposing a project. In this case, the considerations go far beyond those economics, though. It's about taking advantage of the existing facilities, which will benefit the environment and ensure that the project and the farm is environmentally sustainable into the future, into the next generation. It's about ensuring that our rural communities continue to thrive by bringing people back. It's about bringing family members together, not in an economic sense, but in that intangible way that we all feel about our families. It's about far more than economic considerations. We're not denying that economic considerations are part of it, but economic considerations alone are not the basis. Last two criteria I'm going to be very brief on. Can a variance be alleviated by a reasonable method other than a variance? We cover that in our legal memorandum. County staff suggests that because Daly Farm could go to the county board and ask them to amend the zoning ordinance, that somehow is an alternative that's reasonable. I would note that that's true of every single variance application that would come before you. That can't be enough to say that this criteria isn't met. I'd also say that there was discussion about that, I understand, just a few years ago, and nothing came of it. So to suggest that that's a reasonable option here is not. The fact of the matter is, in fact, going back to that discussion, I believe that one of the county commissioners specifically recognized at the county board meeting, which is on video, that a variance application or a variance and the availability of a variance is a reason that we don't need to modify the ordinance. So we now have a circular argument. We don't need to amend the ordinance because you can get a variance, but by the way, you can't get a variance because you could amend the ordinance. That doesn't make sense. Finally, is this a use ordinance? I touched on this before. The property is currently being used as a dairy farm. This criteria doesn't look at the type of specifics, such as setback distances or size, of a project. It looks at the type of use. So if Daly Farm wanted to convert this facility from a dairy to a widget factory, that would be a different kind of use, and that type of use would need to be allowed, or that would be a use variance. This is not a use variance. It's asking to use the property in the same manner for a dairy farm, not only that it's used now, but that is specifically allowed for this type of zoning district. So we submit that each of the criteria for the ordinance is met. So we have the detailed legal pieces, they're all met. But again, stepping back, I ask you to think about, is this the type of project that just from a common sense perspective makes sense? Is this the type of thing that's consistent with the purposes of the ordinance and that should be allowed? I think that that's a no-brainer, and we would ask you to approve the variance. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's do a little recess.
Yeah, I think we'll take a 10-minute break now. So before we took our break, I failed to ask the rest of the board members if anyone had questions. And wait, the person we'd ask the questions to is not here yet. So I guess we'll just wait a few more minutes. So we're going to see if, I believe we have some questions for Mr. Daly. or when, yeah, that would be good. Thank you.
I can just go ahead. Oh, hi, Mr. Daly.
Yes.
I'm curious, how many of the family members are returning? And I mean, just, there's so much talk about family coming
Right.
back. And
Right. So in that picture that I had earlier, just right here is Sydney, if you put your hand up, Dylan, Dominic, Gabe, Dustin is back there with his wife Peggy and their son Jasper. Peggy's expecting again.
And did they grow up on the farm?
Yes. Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
that's cool. Talking about the DNR water appropriation
Yep.
permit that you have yet to get, are you worried at all that the operation would not be financially viable if they decide to cut back quite a bit on your water, since the Minnesota statute gives priority to domestic use of water? And if there's any problem with that, they might do that?
Well, I think we have the permit to construct them, and
Yeah.
then they have to check them. So at that point, yeah, then we'll figure out whether that's, doable or not. Like I said, the capacity is what it is, 92 million. So it's at what we're thinking of using is 75 million.
So, but if they cut back on that, would that be a problem for the expansion?
It could. I'm not quite sure how far back that cut would be. Obviously, if you look at our sand shed, there is also, that's actually a first stage for even more water reclamation to be had. You got to get the sand out. And we've been to some facilities across the country that take water out of the manure and make it drinkable. And so there's systems out there like that. And so if that was maybe the case, then maybe we could look at furthering the technology as far as that is concerned to, and maybe not all of it, but maybe a portion of it. So we could meet that need.
Okay. I know that the Soil and Water Conservation District commented that they were concerned about verbal agreements for the spreading of manure.
Yep.
Do you have written agreements with all the farmers that you'd be spreading manure?
I have. I think I have to look at it again. I have written agreements with most of them. I think I have a verbal on one, and I've actually got verbals on about 3 or 4 other places as well. So, I mean, if it does come down to it, that point too, we got even more acres.
And how do you see the expansion benefiting dairy as a whole in the county?
Well, right now we're currently working with a bunch of dairies. We got Thompson Family Harvesting. They have a dairy farm, and we work with them. They got harvesting equipment that pieces of machinery we don't have. We work with them. We work with Kiefers, which is only a mile or 2 away. They have equipment also. We work with Kronebusch Farms. All these people milk as well as having equipment. So we're always working with them as well. So.
What do you mean by working with them?
And harvesting. When it comes to harvesting, if they need a truck, we got a truck. We need a truck, we can borrow one from them. They also have the tractors, and when we're doing alfalfa harvesting, they have mergers that bring together hay so that we can chop it a little more efficiently. They have that equipment as well. So we don't currently have that equipment, and we depend quite a bit on the surrounding farmers as well.
So how would that change with the expansion?
But could you be using it even more with their equipment? Yeah.
Okay. Just one other question. Not being a farmer, how are antibiotics used on your farm?
Yes, antibiotics are used on our farm. We have protocols in place on how to use those. We're also working all the time with the Lewiston Vet Clinic on how to better manage that and the use of them. It's not something to be taken lightly, but when an animal is sick, we will use them.
So you don't use it routinely?
No, no.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions.
Are there any other questions?
What percentage of your acres that would qualify are protected in cover crops?
What are in cover crops and what are in alfalfa? Is that what you're?
No, alfalfa is a 100% cover crop,
Yeah.
we know that. But of your row crops, what percentage of your acres are protected somewhat with cover crops during the year that they're not growing
Correct.
for crops?
So we're doing 1,800 acres of corn and 400 of that. So a little less than a quarter of the row crops is in cover crop. And so in part of that permit that was described earlier, some of the stipulations that we agreed to with the MPCA, part of that was to use more cover crop. So that 400 acres would be increasing dramatically.
If this board decided to grant you the petition, would you be willing to use cover crops in 100% of your applicable land?
Yeah, well, all the applicable land that we would be putting manure on, and that would be, in that area especially. We do have some acreage that is really far away that we're not putting manure on, that gets commercial fertilizer. But, that we like the benefits of that cover crop as well everywhere. So, I mean, that's definitely not out of the realm of consideration.
Also, what is the percentage of land you own, you or your family, and what percentage is rented from others?
So like what was stated before, my dad and my uncle are the main landowners that we get our feed from and we put the manure on. We do rent some acres from him, or my dad and my two uncles as well, in a farm over in Fillmore. That's about 600 acres that we don't own that they do. But that's the only land that we currently rent right now.
So there is no other land except family?
Correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Daly, there's been some concern that the expansion would put smaller dairies at risk financially.
Yep.
What do you think about that?
I think I've said it before. I've got friends and that are in dairy that are either thinking about getting out or getting out, and we haven't expanded one iota yet. The nature of dairying and the nature of farming has changed a little bit, to say the least, and so that it's having its effect. When you look at dairy farming in Winona County as a whole, since 1997, Winona County has lost 187 dairy farms. And that was in 97 to 2012. And that was after the enactment of the animal unit cap as well. So maybe, to my knowledge, I don't know if it's protected it that much, but I mean, that's the reality of economics and farming right now.
Thank you.
One more question. Is your family, I would assume, adopting new technology? Things are a lot different now than they were 20 years ago or more. Maybe you saw this in the Land magazine. There's a fellow by the name of John Baumgartner from Olivia, Minnesota, that has come up with a system of electrostatic particle ionization, which controls odor in 6-story hog barns in China. Now, the general question I have is, your family farm willing to adopt and take a look at all this new technology that's coming out? And the last thing I'll say is, I've been working with the DNR fertilizing walnut trees with cow manure, just on a small scale, but it's looking very promising. All of these things and others going forward Does your farm consistently willing to take a look at this new technology and these new things out there? There's a lot of trees in Winona County, and maybe if you had a system where you could dry this manure or make it more applicable to DNR forestry, would you be willing to do that?
Absolutely. Our family has been pretty consistent with the use of technology and trying to adapt it. A lot of times we don't like being the first one to do it because a lot of the bugs need to be worked out, but we do love implementing technology on our farm. So that is, yeah, definitely something that we would, take a look at.
Thank you.
Well, as I look at I realize that I haven't formally said we are here to hear docket BOA 2/21/1901 today. And I was to have read this. To consider the petition of Daily Farms of Lewiston, LLP, of 18774 Highway 14, Lewiston, in regards to the following variance request. A variance to allow a feedlot to expand from 1,996.4 animal units to 5,967.7 animal units on a feedlot instead of the animal unit cap of 1,500 animal units pursuant to chapters 3.2.3, 8.4.2, and 10.4.61 of the Winona County zoning ordinance. So I think we're done with questions to you for now, Mr. Daly, and I think it's time to open the public hearing. Do we have a second? Thank you. It has been, all in favor of opening the public hearing, say aye. Aye. Opposed? So we were moved by Larry, seconded by Wendy. The public hearing will open. And I think I saw on the board that, I think everyone who wanted to speak has a number, and so you should kind of be on deck with, say, the first 10 people. And the first one I see here is Lorraine Reddig. And if the other people, then David White, Jerry Schreck, Glenn Groth, Lynette Power, Matt Daly, Becky Clark, Dan Kronebusch, Bob Schell, and Bob Schultz could sort of be ready. Oh, and thank you, Larry. State your name and where you live.
My name is Lorraine Reddig. I live at 27689 Gilmore Ridge Drive, Winona. We have been on our two family farms since 1866. I don't blame Dalys for trying to make a living. Our government is designed to make a few rich at the expense of labor and farmers. In the beginning of our nation, those producers were called slaves and serfs. Now we are called farmers and labor. In this government, of the people, by the people, and for the people, the majority of the people, 80%, owned only 4.7% of the nation's wealth in 2010, according to Poverty Institute. And the richest 1% owned 42.1% of our wealth. The 1% find our farm market prices at auctions that they control to find how cheap they can get our production. Then they set their prices again when they sell our production into private enterprise system for processing and distribution. When farmers complain that market prices don't cover production costs, we are told we are to get bigger and produce more so we can profit on a small margin. So when we do that, market prices go down for all the people, all farmers. That's why so many dairy farmers went out lately, because of surplus production. That hurts every one of us. Our incomes are reduced, some more. Our incomes are reduced some more, so many producers can't meet their human rights needs. Conservative, faith-based capitalism is the no response.
Thank you, Mrs. Reddick.
My name is David White. I live at 705 West Wabasha in Winona. Most of the letters to the editor that you've probably read have focused on the reasons that we should not allow this expansion to take place. Many of the reasons were related to water conditions, the overusage of water, and the possible contamination of the groundwater. And this is one of the things that I believe is important to consider. But I'd also like to consider a different question. Why should it be allowed to continue? This variance will allow only one very small group of people. The Winona County cap was put in 20 years ago approximately for the benefit of the whole Winona County and the residents there. I see no reason why we should change the law or amend the law to allow for the benefit of one small family group. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. White.
Madam Chair, excuse me. Just a recommendation from staff, if you might want to read off the next, say, 10 names, and they could assemble.
I was just going to, we have Jerry Schreck, Glenn Groth, Lynette Power, Matt Daly, Becky Clark.
Yes, my name is Jerry Schreck. I live at 31664 Burr Oak Lane in Winona County since well, the last 42 years. I guess I didn't think we were going to be debating whether or not the animal cap was appropriate for the Daly Farms. My understanding of why we're here today is for you to determine whether or not the law is being followed. The law is the law. I don't mean to sound too German when I say that, but you know, it's on the books. If the Daly Farms meets all 8 criteria and you don't give them variance, you're probably going to be in trouble. On the other hand, and the other side of that is if they meet less than the 8 and you give them a variance, you're going to be in trouble there too. In other words, it's not, are they meeting 6 or 7? The law says they have to meet all 8 criteria. Now, who's the expert and who's going to decide? Are we going to listen to an attorney or 2 or however? I guess personally, and this is my opinion, I would place a lot of emphasis on the staff, the planning and zoning staff. They've done their work. If there are any experts in this room, I would say they would be the ones that I would be very inclined to go with. They're local people. They work for, you know, the government. They are probably the best we can do. So good luck, folks.
Thank you, Mr. Schreck. Glenn Groth and Lynette Power.
Good afternoon, Glenn Groth, representing Winona County Farm Bureau. I live at 30367 County Road 11 in Houston, which is in Winona County. As president of Winona County Farm Bureau, our organization represents farmers of all types, all sizes throughout the county, and our board of directors met in January. We unanimously support Daly Farms' petition to get a variance here. Particularly, we want to look at the elements of looking at a variance, particularly element number 7, when we consider, is it reasonable to maintain, to grow their farm and be asked to do it on different sites? When you consider the extreme cost of that family, I don't think anyone considers spending an extra $5–10 million is a reasonable or a small demand. So I disagree with the county's assessment that this variance, they can fall within the county's ordinance in a reasonable manner. Second thing to consider is criteria number 1. The intent and purpose of the ordinance is not, as their attorney stated, to limit farm size to 1,500 animal units. It is, in fact, to protect the public health and safety and welfare of the people in the county. And by growing their operation in one site, that is the best way to achieve that end, the health, public welfare, and safety of the county. They're doing what's responsible for their family. They're doing the best thing possible for their neighbors. I'd like to address a small part about small family farms. As a soon-to-be former dairy farmer myself, I take issue with people using that issue to hold up their permit, to hold up their variance. The issues for the decline of dairy farms in the county and the Erie region are nuanced and varied, and I don't want to see the death of my dream result in the death of somebody else's.
Thank you, Mr. Groth. Lynette Power, then Matt Daly, and then Becky Clark.
She said she signed the wrong list.
Matt Daly.
Matt Daly, 28548 Enterprise Road, Lewiston, Minnesota. I'm the non-farming brother and uncle to the next generation of Daly Farm Lewiston. They have currently signed up to be the most regulated dairy farm in the history of the state of Minnesota. Good luck. The rules require them to match a manure sample, a soil sample, and a plant grown on the field with the required nitrogen level that that plant requires. No more and no less. These are the rules. This is the same exact level of nitrogen and phosphorus that will be applied to the ground with commercial fertilizer in Winona County, the state of Minnesota, and the majority of the arable landmass in the entire United States of America, if they were a crop farmer and no manure was involved. This is modern agriculture today. And if you're educated on the subject, this is an undisputed fact supported by the University of Minnesota, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, and every agricultural university in the United States of America as a way to eliminate pollution due to any type of over-application of nutrients. If you do vote no on this variance, you're clearly voting no not only to this dairy farm, but for every farm in this county in many respects. You spread a message that the county is anti-agriculture, and I hope this doesn't take place. There's clearly a divide between the city and its rural residents and towns and townships who have voted in favor of this law. Please separate what was done 30, 50, and 60 years ago. You will try to punish the new generation who is now committed to using this modern agriculture. These people are doing this out of love for themselves, for their children, and for their water. Please don't harm your county and the residents in it. Thank you.
Thank you. And so we have Becky Clark, Dan Cronenbush, and then Bob Schell.
Becky Clark, Rolling Stone, Minnesota. Dairy farms help sustain rural America. The state's dairy production creates economic activities in sectors other than ag, such as manufacturing, transportation, trade, service, finance, insurance, real estate, construction, tourism, etc. But speaking of tourism, I know Winona County is working hard on creating an environment to attract more tourism to its county. Dairy can bring beneficial attention to our beautiful part of the county, too. Just last year, the Daly Farm was selected in preparation for the Super Bowl to host the Minnesota Vikings cheerleaders at their farm to shoot a dairy commercial which garnished positive national attention to our community. I feel the rural and urban communities can work together to create a diverse county where adventurers will want to come to take in the beauty of the bluffs, river, and countryside we all love. Some people will speak in fear of the environmental impacts of a larger dairy. We have the MPCA who does the fact-finding research to help us understand the potential impacts. After reviewing the information and addressing everyone's concerns factually, the MPCA's conclusion was to approve the project, and so should Winona County. The 1,500 cap is an arbitrary number that is out of date. Midwestern farmers are committed to sustainability. In the last 60 years, the dairy industry has increased milk yield by 4 times, while decreasing manure production by 76%, water usage by 65%, and carbon emissions by 63%. We are eager to implement new technologies and advancements in ag to become ever more environmentally sustainable. But new technologies come with a big price tag. With these cost efficiencies larger dairies generate, they can capitalize and implement new technologies quicker to help them be as sustainable as possible. Some examples are a sand separator, manure digesters. There's even a manure filtration system which separates the sand from manure.
Thank you. We have Dan Kronebusch, Bob Schell, and then Bob Schultz.
I'm Dan Kronebusch, 17803, Highway 248, Altura, Minnesota. I'm a third-generation dairy farm. We currently have 500 plus milk cows. I employ 10. We have multiple farms throughout Winona County. As our dairy expanded, from the day my father came, had 6 cows, and we expanded to that level. Expansion in any business in our country, which I love, is part of technology and the new wave of agriculture. We cannot today, the Board of Adjustments, not vote in favor of expanding dairy cattle numbers in Winona County. Reasoning: I have a dairy farm that was owned. It used to be milked, 90 cows on it. The dairy site was closed. We totally removed all the buildings except for a machine shed, and the devaluation of that real estate without the buildings and without a dairy farm, without alfalfa, without cover crops. I have farms in St. Charles Township that are, I used to grow alfalfa on it. It was too costly to transport that alfalfa 13 miles to the current dairy. Please, as this board today considers this variance for this progressive, outstanding dairy farm and others such as mine, so that my sons can take our real estate and expand it to 1,800 cow units, 2,000. Please do not hinder the industry and the asset value of Winona County by continuing to have an animal cap of 1,500 units. I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. And we have Bob Schell, Bob Schultz, and then John Carrier.
Good afternoon. My name is Bob Schell. I am also a lifelong resident of Winona County with a century-and-a-half family dairy farm in Mount Vernon Township in Winona County. I presently represent the 5th generation, my nephew the 6th generation, and his family on board as the 7th potential generation family farm operating in Winona County. We had succumbed to the dairy industry in the early 2000s due to antiquated equipment, but presently still have animal production going on at the farm. That is why I'm extremely concerned about what is happening to the Daly farm here today, as it might affect the potential future of our family farm. Secondly, I'm also here representing the city of Altura. I'm presently in my 6th term as the mayor of the city of Altura, one period in the late 80s, early 90s, and now presently the last 2 elected rotations. And how things of this nature can be affected in the farming community. Rural Winona County is direly in need of expansion at the farm level. This creates jobs, it creates economic development. It's a fact that's brought out by a lot of economists. One more dairy cow on the land is about $17,000 worth of economic development going on around through the community. It's tough out there in this day. It's tough enough that I can remember back in the mid-90s, we used to have a turkey slaughter plant in Altura. That plant, we were able to provide through 2 wells enough water to generate 500 to 700,000 gallons of water per day. This particular facility generated about 3.5 million pounds of processed turkey per week, employed 350 people in a town that was smaller than the size of the people that came in town every day to work. It's now defunct because it was antiquated, the same situation that Daly Farms are in. They need to upgrade their facilities to stay active and economically viable. So appreciate your consideration.
Thank you. Bob Schultz, John Carrier, then Jim Gurley.
Hi, my name is Bob Schultz. I live in Winona, 118 Glendale Road. I'm new here. Come from the printing industry down in Chicago. A lot of dealings with the Illinois and Indiana EPA. We grew from a $3 million to $150 million company, and how did we do that? We bought. We bought and we grew. And one of the things that we learned along the way is that good ethics, good environmental practices is good business. Goes right to your bottom line. And so we grew with that as our mantra, and people screamed in the printing industry. They hated it. And yet at the same time, we have to grow with that. I moved here because I found that this community was concerned about the whole community. What I'm hearing here today sounds like me just 10 years ago, growing, asking for permission. Not really ever getting it from Illinois or Indiana, but also saying, okay, we have to live within the rules, and we lived within the rules, and yet we still did well. I understand there's a problem going on with the dairy, and I get that. And that's a larger issue, I think, than what Winona County is facing. I do understand that dairy needs some issues to be done to resolve it, and I really feel for the board for having to make this decision. But at this point, I can only say that I do not think that it meets the criteria that are stated in the ordinance. And I would ask you to respect the cap. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see. John Carrier, Jim Gurley, then Walt Kelly. John Carrier. All right, then we have Jim Gurley, Walt Kelly, and Chris Sauer.
Good afternoon. I wanted to thank each of you on the board for your service. I would strongly urge you to deny this variance. I believe that water is life, and without plentiful, unpolluted groundwater, nobody could live in rural Winona County. Daly Farm wants to remove 92 million gallons of our precious groundwater from our aquifer every year, 3 times what Lewiston uses. Equally concerning is that it would put the quality of our groundwater at risk. And I know the arguments that the family has put forth, as well as their attorney, but I would point you to their track record. According to MPCA records, Daly Farm has had repeated violations on their manure basins. In 1997, they were fined $6,000. Unauthorized construction of 2 manure basins. 1999, liner failure in all Daly manure basins. 2002, liner failures in all Daly manure basins. October 2009, failure to repair manure basin, 3 other violations. November 2009, basin still not repaired. MPCA says Daly's runoff, quote, has potential to reach waters of the state, unquote. And just last month, Daly again not in compliance with regulations. Should our county allow a corporation with this track record to radically increase the amount of manure they produce, especially considering our karst topography? The answer is clear, and the answer is clear from our planning department and zoning department. Your board must deny this variance request. Thank you.